The Everglades are dying. Or they were supposed to be. Then someone flew a drone over the river of grass in December 2025. And what they found changed everything scientists thought they knew about one of the most hostile ecosystems on the planet. Spoiler alert, nature doesn't read the script we write for it. Most people think of the Everglades as that swampy death trap where pythons fight alligators and tourists get eaten by mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds. And sure, that's all technically true. But the new footage rolling in from the southern tip of Florida is showing something nobody predicted. The ecosystem isn't collapsing. It's rewiring itself. And the aftermath is equal parts terrifying and incredible. Let's start with what everyone got wrong. For decades, the narrative was simple. Humans destroyed the Everglades. We drained half of it for sugarcane fields and suburban sprawl. We dumped fertilizer runoff until the water turned toxic. We accidentally introduced Burmese pythons that proceeded to eat literally everything with a pulse. The river of grass, once stretching over 4,000 square miles, got squeezed down to half its size. By 2020, scientists were basically writing obituaries for the place. Then came the hurricanes. Not just one or two, 5 major storms between 2022 and 2024 absolutely pummeled South Florida. Hurricane categories became irrelevant. When you're getting hit back-to-back like a boxer who forgot to duck. The expectation was total ecological collapse. Saltwater intrusion would poison the freshwater marshes. The already struggling wildlife would get decimated. Except that's not what happened. The first hint that something weird was going on came from a grad student at Florida International University, who was tracking water flow patterns in January 2025. Her name was Christina Morales, and she was supposed to be documenting the death throes of the ecosystem for her dissertation. Instead, her data showed water quality improving in areas that should have been biological wastelands. Phosphorus levels were dropping. Dissolved oxygen was going up. She thought her equipment was broken. She wasn't the only one getting strange readings. Park rangers started reporting unusual animal behavior. Wading birds that had abandoned their traditional nesting sites were coming back. Not just a few stragglers, thousands of them. Roseate spoonbills, wood storks, great egrets, species that had been in serious decline were suddenly showing up in numbers not seen since the 1950s. But here's where it gets really interesting. The pythons, those invasive monsters that were supposed to be the final nail in the Everglades coffin, were dying. Not all of them, but enough to notice. Wildlife cameras set up to track python populations started finding dead snakes. Lots of them. And they weren't dying of old age or starvation. Something was killing them. Fast forward to December 2025. A documentary crew working on a piece about climate change got permission to fly drones deep into the most remote parts of the Everglades. We're talking areas where humans rarely go because the airboats can't reach and the water's too deep to walk through but too shallow to swim. They launched their drones, expecting to capture footage of devastation. Dying trees, stagnant water, maybe a python or two lounging around like they owned the place. What they captured instead looked like something out of a nature documentary from 50 years ago. The footage, which started circulating online in early January 2026, shows something remarkable. The sawgrass marshes, which were supposed to be struggling, a spot are thriving, but not in the way they used to. The vegetation patterns have completely changed. Where there used to be monoculture stands of sawgrass, there are now these weird mixed communities of plants. Cattails next to sawgrass, next to willows, next to species that researchers are still trying to identify. Even stranger. The water is crystal clear in places where it used to look like chocolate milk. You can see straight down to the limestone bedrock in areas that were murky for decades. And swimming through that clear water? Alligators. So many alligators. Their populations are exploding. Which might sound like bad news. Except alligators are what ecologists call a keystone species. The whole system does well. But wait, there's more. Remember those pythons? The ones that were dying mysteriously? Turns out the alligators figured out how to hunt them. Not the little pythons. We're talking about the big ones. 15, 18, 20-foot monsters that were apex predators with no natural enemies. Adult alligators are now actively hunting adult pythons. Probably 14 feet long. Dragging what looks like a 16-foot python into deeper water. Researchers who've analyzed the video say this shouldn't be possible. Pythons that size are ridiculously powerful. They can constrict prey much larger than themselves. But somehow the alligators adapted their hunting strategy. They're going for quick, devastating bites to the python's head and neck, then using the death roll to break the snake's spine before it can coil up and fight back. Nature just invented a new apex predator matchup. And the local team is winning. Here's where the science gets wild. Dr. Sarah Chen, a wetland ecologist at the University of Miami, has been studying the Everglades for 30 years. She immediately organized an expedition to ground truth what they were seeing. Her team spent 3 weeks in the field in late December and early January, and their preliminary findings are absolutely bonkers. The hurricanes didn't destroy the ecosystem. They reset it. All that storm surge and flooding and chaos basically hit the Control-Alt-Delete button on decades of human-caused damage. The saltwater intrusion everyone was worried about, it actually killed off a lot of the invasive plants that had been choking out native species. Plants like Melaleuca and Brazilian pepper, that had been impossible to control, suddenly died back in massive numbers. The floodwaters also redistributed nutrients in ways that accidentally mimicked the natural wet-dry cycles that used to happen before humans started managing water flow. Essentially, the hurricanes did in 2 years what restoration projects have been trying to do for decades. And it only cost, billions in property damage and a complete restructuring of South Florida's infrastructure. So, not exactly a recommended management strategy, but nature doesn't care about our plans or our budgets. It just responds to conditions. The python situation is even more fascinating. Turns out those snakes had been so successful partly because the alligator population had been artificially suppressed for decades. Too much human activity, hunting, habitat loss. But their numbers were kept in check by us. When the hurricanes hit and humans temporarily abandoned large sections of the Everglades, alligator populations exploded. And with more alligators came more competition for food, which meant alligators started experimenting with new prey items, which had no natural predators. Suddenly had one. Angry, armored one, with a bite force of nearly 3,000 pounds per square inch. That's enough to crack a turtle shell like a walnut. A python skull doesn't stand a chance. Dr. Chen's team also documented something even weirder. The fish populations are going absolutely crazy. Species that had been nearly wiped out are coming back in huge numbers. Largemouth bass, bluegill, various species of sunfish. They're bigger than they should be. Researchers are catching fish that are significantly larger than the historical average for their species in this region. The hypothesis is that the improved water quality combined with reduced competition from invasive fish has created optimal growing conditions. It's like the ecosystem got a performance-enhancing supplement, except instead of steroids it's just clean water and balanced predator-prey dynamics. Who knew? The bird situation might be the most dramatic change. The drone footage from January 2026 shows rookeries, those massive colonial nesting sites, in places that have been abandoned since the 1980s. We're talking thousands of birds. Wood storks, which are federally endangered, are nesting in numbers not seen in decades. Roseate spoonbills, those ridiculous pink wading birds that look like they were designed by a committee on acid, are everywhere. And they're not just there for a vacation. They're breeding successfully. Chick survival rates are through the roof. Why? Because there's food. Lots of it. The fish populations are exploding, which means the birds that eat fish are thriving. The aquatic invertebrate populations are booming, which means the birds that eat bugs and crustaceans are thriving. It's a cascade effect. And for once it's cascading in the right direction. But let's not get too comfortable with this good news story. Because there's a catch. There's always a catch. The footage also reveals some concerning patterns. The saltwater intrusion, while it killed invasive plants, also permanently altered some areas. There are sections of the Everglades that used to be freshwater marsh that are now brackish. The vegetation there is completely different. Mangroves are pushing inland, replacing sawgrass, which is fine for mangroves, but it means the freshwater ecosystem is shrinking. And here's the thing about mangroves. They're awesome at sequestering carbon and providing nursery habitat for marine fish. But they're not the Everglades. They're a different ecosystem entirely. So while the total ecological productivity might be the same or even higher, the actual character of the place is changing. Then there's the python problem. Yes, alligators are hunting them now. The ones that survive this new predation pressure are the ones that are better at hiding, faster or more aggressive. Natural selection in real time. Give it another 5 years and we might have a population of pythons that are specifically adapted to avoid alligators. Evolution doesn't stop just because we want it to. Some researchers are also worried about disease. When you have population explosions, like what's happening with the alligators and certain bird species, you create perfect conditions for disease outbreaks. Stress the system, and suddenly you've got avian cholera or some other pathogen ripping through populations. The ecosystem might be thriving now, but it could be setting itself up for a crash. And we can't ignore the human element. The Everglades don't exist in a vacuum. They're downstream from millions of people in South Florida. All that improved water quality is great, but it's dependent on reduced nutrient runoff from agriculture. The hurricanes disrupted farming operations, which accidentally gave the ecosystem a break, but farming is starting to recover. Sugarcane production is ramping back up. The phosphorus is going to start flowing again. The difference this time is that people are paying attention. The drone footage went viral, not just among scientists, but with the general public. People saw the crystal clear water and the birds and the alligators, and something clicked. There's now massive political pressure to maintain the improved conditions. Farmers are being pushed to adopt better practices. Water management districts are being forced to prioritize ecological health alongside flood control. Will it last? Who knows? Politics and environmental protection have a complicated relationship in Florida. But for now, there's momentum. The January 2026 footage also revealed something that has historians and ecologists scratching their heads. Deep in the most remote sections, the drone cameras picked up what appear to be old-growth cypress trees that nobody knew existed. We're talking trees that could be hundreds of years old, hidden in areas that were thought to be too degraded to support them. How did these trees survive decades of drainage and development and invasive species? Nobody knows. But their presence suggests that the Everglades are more resilient than anyone thought. That even in the most disturbed areas, pockets of the original ecosystem persisted, waiting for conditions to improve. It's a reminder that nature is patient in ways humans can't comprehend. We operate on election cycles and quarterly earnings reports. But give it an opening, even a small one, and it will take it. The footage continues to pour in. Citizen scientists with drones are documenting changes in their local areas. Researchers are scrambling to set up long-term monitoring stations to track how the ecosystem evolves. Documentary crews are planning follow-up expeditions, and tourists are starting to notice. Airboat tour operators are reporting that their customers are actually seeing wildlife again, not just mangrove tunnels and mosquitoes, but perhaps the most important thing the footage revealed is something less tangible. It showed that ecosystems can surprise us, that the narratives we construct about environmental decline aren't always accurate or complete, that nature is weird and adaptable and sometimes does things we don't expect. The Everglades were supposed to be a cautionary tale, a story about how humans can destroy even the most robust ecosystems through carelessness and greed. And that story is still true. We did tremendous damage. We squeezed a massive wilderness down to a fraction of its former size. We poisoned it with runoff and choked it with invasive species, and generally treated it like a garbage dump that occasionally produced decent fishing. But the new footage tells a different story too. One about resilience, about adaptation, about how ecosystems, given even the smallest chance, will fight like hell to survive. The alligators learning to hunt pythons, the birds returning to abandoned rookeries, the fish growing bigger in cleaner water, the cypress trees, hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment. It's not a happy ending because the story isn't over. The Everglades are still in trouble. Climate change is still pushing saltwater inland. Sea level rise is still threatening to drown the southern portions. Development pressure is still squeezing from the north. The political will to fund restoration could evaporate with the next election cycle. But for now, in this moment captured by drones flying over the river of grass, in the dying days of 2025, the Everglades are showing us something remarkable. They're showing us that the fight isn't over, that nature is tougher than we give it credit for, that the aftermath of disaster can sometimes, against all odds, include recovery. Just don't expect it to look like what you planned. Nature writes its own script. We just get to watch.